Welcome back to the world today. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy is in the United Kingdom. He's already met with the British the British Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, in Downing Street. The Ukrainian president thanked Britain for its unwavering support since the invasion of his country by Russia.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy arrives in London on a rare visit abroad. It is President Zelenskyy's only second foreign visit since Russia invaded Ukraine on February 24th last year, after British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak pledged to expand the training of Ukrainian troops to include fighter jet pilots and Marines. Just after he touched down in the UK, Mr. Zelenskyy met Mr. Sunak outside Downing Street.
You feel Britain's back.
Is this the beginning of you ending up with British fighter jets, Mr. Zelenskyy?
Zelenskyy thanks Britain for its support in its defense against Russia's invasion. Britain announced an immediate surge of military deliveries to Ukraine to help it fend off an intensifying Russian offensive, and pledged to train its pilots as Zelenskyy visited. Britain says the training will ensure Ukrainian pilots were able to fly sophisticated NATO standard fighter jets in the future.
Thank you so much, Richard, for inviting me, and for me, a great honor to be here in Britain. And thanks, Britain, for society, first of all, for your big support from the first days of full-scale invasion. Thank you so much. We are proud, really, and we have very good relations with Rishi, and we'll prolong our dialogue, which I think very important for security. All countries, of course, security for the world.
Western countries have scaled up their pledges of military support for Ukraine since the start of the new year.
Now, the Ukrainian president's itinerary is continued today with a visit to King Charles in Buckingham Palace in London. It was his only second stop in his second trip abroad since Russia invaded Ukraine on February 24. He had been in Washington in December. President Zelenskyy told King Charles in Ukraine that in Ukraine today, every Air Force pilot is a king. The Ukrainian president met the king for the first time in a truly special audience at Buckingham Palace. As he mentioned the monarch's RAF carrier in his campaign to get British jets to Ukraine. President Zelenskyy was dressed in his trademark khaki green military fatigues as he was welcomed to the royal residence on Wednesday afternoon. King Charles greeted the president with a wide smile, a warm handshake. The president is on his first visit to the UK since the Russian invasion of his country began, and in his address to Parliament, he said he would take the opportunity to thank Charles for the support he'd shown Ukraine as the Prince of Wales. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, whom we saw earlier in that report, has since tasked the Defence Secretary with investigating what jets might be able to give, what the UK might be able to give to Ukraine. Both leaders had a pretty fruitful meeting, we understand. We mentioned the British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak earlier. Well, his government wants to see a decisive military victory in the battlefield this year in Ukraine. President Volodymyr Zelenskyy met him earlier in a rare visit abroad. He also got the opportunity to address Parliament. Zelenskyy is on his first stop on his second trip after a visit to the United States since Russia invaded Ukraine. He spoke to the British Parliament after meeting with Prime Minister Rishi Sunak.
And can I thank the honourable gentleman for his comments on Ukraine. It's something that not only the whole country can be proud of, but the entire House can be proud that we came together to stand by Ukraine when the moment mattered, and that we will continue to stand with them united as one Parliament and one United Kingdom. Speaker, our objective remains to ensure a Ukrainian victory in this conflict. Vladimir Putin's aggression cannot be seen in any way to have been successful, and that that's why we have accelerated and increased our support militarily for Ukraine this year. It's a decision that I took as Prime Minister. Today we are going even further, not just having provided Challenger tanks and being one of the first countries to do so, which catalysed the provision of tanks from other nations as well, but also today to move to start training Ukrainian Marines in the advanced capabilities they will need to mount further offensive, but also to train their pilots on advanced combat aircraft. So the House can be reassured we will continue to support Ukraine to ensure decisive military victory on the battlefield this year.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, can I...
Our London correspondent Juliana Olaika joins us via audio. Juliana, you've been monitoring President Zelensky's visit all day today. Talk to us about, his address to Parliament, if that is true, that he did get a chance to speak with the British Parliament.
Good evening, Amarachi. It was a big day here in the UK, a big diplomatic day, and we were live in Westminster at about lunchtime, just about half an hour after President Volodymyr Zelensky received pretty much a hero's welcome by Prime Minister Rishi Sunak at Stansted Airport. That was a 40-minute drive to Downing Street on his arrival. There were plenty of Ukrainian supporters. In fact, there were sporadic blasts of the Ukrainian national anthem. That's how well received he was here in Britain. And then, of course, was that pretty historic speech. It's very rare, of course, for obvious reasons, that no foreign diplomat has spoken in Parliament before. Of course, we did have that virtual address he gave to parliamentarians just shortly after the invasion in March 2022. But as to be expected, it was a robust, impassioned. I don't think Rishi Sunak would have liked the fact that he addressed Boris Johnson personally, but of course he would, because Boris Johnson, the former British Prime Minister, has been a staunch ally, so staunch in fact that he received an honorary citizenship just a couple of weeks ago. But really, what the Ukrainian president did is thank the British people. He thanked them with his whole heart, not just on his own behalf, but on behalf of the entire Ukrainian population. Of course, he made reference to the fact that they do need more help. And we are, of course, just a few days before the eve of the first anniversary. But despite the fact that the West appeared to be sitting on their hands in terms of how much military support they give to Ukraine, because, of course, they don't want to provoke Russia and, in effect, cause issues for Poland. But really, this was a welcome visit to thank the British people. And given that this is only, I know people are saying third because he visited Poland, but some say second because the trip to Poland was en route back from Washington. The fact that Britain have seen Volodymyr Zelensky today just double downs on the fact that we are one of their closest allies in the world. And it just shows Russia that, the Ukrainian support is still very high.
It is, Juliana, and, he got a chance to meet with King Charles III. He did thank him, for Britain's support throughout the war and Britain facing its own crisis, despite Britain facing its own crisis, given that report that we'd seen about 2 weeks ago from the Defense Secretary, who said he'd heard from a US senior official that the UK's position, its military stance, is sliding, and that's because it's been focused on the war in Ukraine. Did that even come up at all in the discussions between President Zelensky and the British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, or with King Charles?
Well, I think it's very likely to have come up, as to be expected, given the fact that, Volodymyr Zelensky is a very wanted man, that the full details of what has taken place today is pretty much unknown. In fact, the media wasn't even told that Zelensky was going to come until about after 9 a.m. local time. So we definitely know that he has had, of course, private meetings with Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, and I'm sure that was discussed. In terms of that meeting that has literally just taken place in Buckingham Palace, him meeting King Charles III, again, that was pretty much ceremonial and symbolic. We haven't really heard much from the King in terms of his stance on the war since he's been king, but there were some comments he made back in May, I believe, during a visit to Canada. And, you know, he said what he was seeing, this is King Charles I'm referring to, he was then the Prince of Wales, was horrifying and barbaric. And as soon as those comments were made, we actually did get a response from Vladimir Putin saying it was completely out of line for the palace to speak, bearing in mind, Amarachi, when Her Majesty, the late Her Majesty, the Queen, died in September, we did have a message of condolence from Vladimir Putin to the people of Britain. And he has been here for state visits. So I think it's really going to hurt him personally that Volodymyr Zelenskyy has had this hero's welcome and this ceremonial attention at the palace. But I don't think it was likely that King Charles III spoke to him about Britain's military capabilities, which you referred to from the conversations that the Defence Secretary Ben Wallace had with a US general, basically saying that our tanks and our military capability is decades behind and needs to be quickly beefed up if we are going to offer the support that Rishi Sunak outlined to parliamentarians earlier today.
Juliana, how are people interpreting this visit? I mean, it's the second or third, depending on where you stand, second or third for President Zelenskyy, who's leaving behind a war going on in his country. He and some other senior officials had already mentioned Russia is planning a major offensive. So how are people interpreting the visit to the UK in terms of, you know, what more support he's expecting from, you know, these allies?
Yeah, I think a lot of people were quite surprised. As I said, we were live at the top of the hour outside the House of Parliament. And Amarachi, I'm telling you, it was swamped with people. It definitely, you could feel the mood music being pretty celebratory. People were shocked, people were happy. Ukrainians were crying, bearing in mind that Britain has been overseeing this Homes for Ukraine scheme, which has seen tens of thousands of Ukrainians being given a charitable accommodation by British people. So they're very much here, and it's very much on the agenda. Is it at the top of the agenda? No, sadly, it's not. And I think that's why Zelenskyy has been beefing up his pleas. And I believe he is going to Brussels, isn't he? He's going to be sitting with EU leaders on Thursday there, because public support is waning. Let's not forget, we are going through the worst cost of living crisis in over 40 years. Inflation is high, industrial action is varied. People want more money at the end of the month so they don't have to go to food banks. And if that means sending less to Ukraine, then for the vast majority of Britons, so be it. I think domestically there are far more pressing issues that the Prime Minister has to face. But having said that, you know, this was certainly a political coup for Rishi, who's been on the ropes over the past couple of days following those scathing editorials this weekend from his predecessor Liz Truss and Boris Johnson. So the fact that he was the Prime Minister that oversaw this historic visit is a great lifter of the mood, but it doesn't take away the fact that unfortunately, Ukraine is not a priority for the British people. You know, better wages, better working conditions, and some political stability is what most Britons are wanting at the moment.
It's a fine dance, isn't it? The Prime Minister is playing here, trying to appeal to people back home with the strikes raging, and then trying to also appear to Ukrainians as a friend. He's going on to Belgium, as you mentioned, and he's had a meeting with the EU officials. He had that last week. He said that at the end of the year, Ukraine would likely put in a request for EU citizenship, for EU membership, beg your pardon. Where do you think the EU stands, you know, really with Ukraine? They said it wouldn't be easy. They're not going to provide them a shortcut or anything, but they will support. So exactly what sort of assurance is the EU giving to Ukraine at this time that may help President Zelenskyy go back home and probably sleep a little easier tonight?
It's a tricky question, but incredibly important, because, of course, you know, this illegal invasion has crippled some economies, particularly those on mainland Europe. You know, Germany and Poland come to mind. However, you know, it's, as you said, it's a delicate balancing act, and I think listening to what Rishi Sunak had to say today in terms of bolstering the training for Ukrainian troops who are stationed in the southwest of England, providing further tanks, providing more humanitarian assistance. I think certainly they're going to be checking their keynote addresses and making sure that it is aligned with what Britain has said. In fact, Britain were the first country to send those two Challenger tanks, and Biden and Olaf Scholz were sitting on their hands for quite a while. So even though in terms of proximity, you know, the EU are much closer and are feeling the pinch more, I think in terms of global leadership, I think Britain would like to say that they have been putting their foot first. They have been leading where others have followed. But it's certainly going to be interesting. Of course, we are approaching a year. You can never write off what the Russians could do. Perhaps there could be an even more intense offensive over the next couple of days. But we shall have to wait and see. But certainly over the past couple of months, apart from the humanitarian aspect, which I think is important. Of course, we know Poland has taken the vast majority of the 7.8 million people that have fled. But in terms of everything else, I think Britain has certainly been, you know, head and shoulders above what the US and the EU have had to offer.
Juliana, thank you again for the update.
Thank you, Amaranchi.